Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Haas. I'm the CEO of Association for Enterprise Growth, AEG. And this afternoon's session will be about post-pandemic sales and marketing strategy. This session is intended to be interactive. We will start by setting the context and introduce our panelists, who will provide some their observations, the implications of what they see, and some recommendations for how to improve your sales and marketing effectiveness. Please put your questions in the, you can raise your hand or put them in the Q&A box. There's a lot of change, and it might look obvious to you, but there's a lot of nuance that we're going to go through today. We'll address your questions now, but also possibly if you have follow-on questions, we will reach out to you, and you can certainly reach out to us. Today's session will be recorded and available on YouTube. So a couple words about AEG. We are we're an organization, a network organization of elite advisors based in Washington, D.C. and expanding to other cities. And these advisors provide a complementary and integrated view of how to grow small mid-sized businesses. And our expertise ranges from cyber to strategy to sales and marketing, talent, risk management, cost reduction, M&A, legal, and financial. We can help anywhere along a owner's journey, from startup to transition to building personal wealth. So let's proceed with today's presentation. So the pandemic has provided us a interesting approach that there's really no going backwards. Sometimes there'll be a recession, it'll be a return to normal. That's not the case. The changes in behavior, in technology, in economics, and business practices have made a new paradigm for how sales and marketing is done. The B2B buyer's journey and the seller's perspective have changed, and the pandemic has accelerated trends that were already in place. In some cases, trends that they thought were going to take 10 years have been shortened up to about a year. In this environment, there are going to be winners and losers. Anytime there's a massive disruption, this happens to be the Iceland-England game in the 2016 Euro. Even a strong competitor against a weak competitor, Iceland beat England 2-1. And you can tell which team is Iceland and which team is England. And this is the situation when there's disruption in the marketplace. If you are strong and you don't pay attention, you can be beaten out by a presumably weaker competitor. So that's why we're spending time today talking about what has changed and what's not. So it's not like there's no future for you. There is a promised land. I think what winning looks like is, if you recognize there may be a problem with the way you're approaching sales and marketing, recognizing that you have to put some effort into changing your mindset, perhaps changing the tools and processes you use, and recognize that your customer has new preferences, new ways they're buying. The ways that you assume that they're buying are not necessarily the same. And we'll get into a specific example of how your perspective and your clients may not match, and your competitors might match better. So, and these new tools and knowledges, you may not be amenable to them. They may sound strange. They may sound the kind of things that, well, that doesn't make sense to me. I've never seen that before. And just like in Star Wars, Luke didn't want to take Yoda's advice, but apparently that's the advice you need to have. And finally, to move ahead, and since there's no going back to the way it was, you need to choose your partners and your technology and choose it wisely. So I apologize for the head snapping, shifting between metaphors, but I want to introduce our panelists today. Deborah Fell, Area Managing Partner and CMO for Chief Outsiders. Deborah, you want to say just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'll just share that while I have 30 years of marketing experience growing companies, to get to Chief Outsiders quickly, We have 84 seasoned marketing executives on the roster, any one of which can help companies navigate and excel through challenging and times and changing environments. And certainly that's what we're all living in and what we're talking about today. Think of chief outsiders as the lease versus buy option for a chief marketing officer. You get a seasoned pro who steps in and helps companies navigate a marketing plan and start delivering against it for mid-market companies with no long-term commitment. So again, I'm thankful actually to be with you all today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks. Next is Chris Tully, Chief Sales Officer for Sales Growth Advisors. Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'm Chris Tully. I founded my company, Sales Growth Advisors, in 2013 to help CEOs and business owners grow revenue more predictably and faster. Sales Growth Advisors works with business owners to identify, assess, and repair sales issues. We focus, for the most part, on sales strategy, process, and execution to develop and implement a repeatable sales model that gets to reliable revenue growth and improved profitability. Sales Growth Advisors is part of the Sales Acceleration Network, which is the largest network of outsourced sales leadership in the country. A bit of a similar construct to Chief Outsiders, except with a focus specifically on sales. My clients are typically, small to mid-sized companies, CEOs and business owners that are frustrated with their ability to grow fast enough and not exactly sure how to fix the problem, but they know that sales is at the root of it, and they're tired of doing it all themselves. Most of them are typically under 20 million, some outliers on the high side. So I'm delighted to be here today and to be part of this panel, and happy to chat with you about some of these issues. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Last panelist, Shevy Shafie, the Chief Marketing Officer and partner of Marstudio and the CEO of Marstudio.
Hey, thanks everyone. Hope you guys can hear me. Thanks, Mark. I don't know if you noticed, I was taking pictures of the screen because I'm honored to be on a panel with Deborah and Chris. Definitely two geniuses in their own field. So I'm not even sure I'm in the right place. Having said that, I'm Shevy. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer and CEO and partner at Marstudio. We provide corporate branding, strategic advertising through expert visual marketing. So we provide that augmented or fractional marketing department, stemming everything from the Chief Marketing Officer services down to the graphic designer services, web developer services, all in-house. As far as what our clients value about what we provide in terms of direction, and is exactly that. It's not deliverables, but it's the direction and specifically the strategic insight that we bring to our projects. A lot of times when we think of marketing, we think of lead gen as a basic definition of marketing. And more often than not, when people are looking to generate more business, they focus on increasing their leads, but it might be a conversion issue rather than a lead gen issue. Identifying what the right problems are and then being able to figure out how to fix it is really the key, and having the right personnel and people in place to do that. Back to you, Mark.
Okay. Thanks, Shevy. You can see that these are among the elite of the elite advisors at AEG, and each of them has a different perspective. They come from a different background, and they can all provide some various nuances to your perspective. And one thing about AEG is we do provide integrated solutions to a problem. Sales might be sales training. It may be a bad product. It may be marketing data. It may be leadership. It may be budget. It could be any of these things. And that's what having a group of people from these different perspectives provides the nuance to actually come up with the best solution for you. They're not stock answers. And that's really what AEG does, is we bring sort of the best of the best in each setting. So let's move on. Deborah, do you want to start discussing some of the differences that you see
Sure.
in the marketplace.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. This headline, I think we all are also feeling what a difference a year makes. Just to orient you to this chart, the left side of it was a report from ITR Economics pulled at about mid-year of 2020, so a year ago. And at that point in time, the red arrow was where we were. We didn't really know what was coming ahead, but ITR and various other firms were predicting a rise, that we were going to recover. At the same time, it clearly showed the negative 2.1% for 2020 in terms of U.S. gross domestic product growth, much more robust 2021, and a trend of growth continuing into 2022. At the same time we were looking at this chart, the headlines were things like, just how deadly is this contagion? How low will the market go? And, on and on about, the Great Recession, etc. Jump ahead to a year later, and you can see the difference. And in fact, I lost my red arrow here, but if you look at where the solid line ends on the chart of the right, you can see that, and you can feel that we've spiked, we are recovering, and projections for 21 aren't quite as rosy, but they're still forward. The economic recovery is still occurring. And at that point in the middle of this year, the headlines changed to economic recovery is spreading to more segments, factor in higher costs, which of course we're also seeing and experiencing, and expect the rise to continue through 2023. And then other information like the fact that consumers are holding on to $4.8 trillion in cash, that B2B activity is up year over year and actually at an all-time high. Even though we have challenges, and we always will have challenges in moving our business forward, we're certainly in a much better place. And so what we advised a year ago at this time, and we continue to advise today, is for companies to really relook at, stay in touch with their customer, but make it a point in time where you really relook at, how have your customers changed? Have their needs changed? Does what you offer as your most important differentiator, is that still what matters most to your customers? Are you in all the right channels? So on and so forth. And those are key components of your value proposition. So we encouraged our clients to really go in and let's relook at the value proposition and see what we might need to do to tweak. If you go on to the next slide, so we saw lots of changes. And the reason why we were recommending clients go in and take a look is because some were experiencing what one of my clients was experiencing. The main point of this chart is that we need to make sure that the differentiators we think matter most are actually the ones that our customers would prioritize the most. And this was my client was an architectural design firm, and they felt that their most important differentiator, what mattered most to the customer, was design. What you're looking at here was the customer view, not my client's view, but the customer view of what mattered most to them and how they saw the performance of my client, called the services company, versus one of their competitors. Bottom line here is you see that the blue, which is the client's, the customer's view, what they valued most was speed, followed shortly by flexibility. They valued design, as you can see above the design attribute, but not as much as speed. The services company was a killer on design. The company thought so, the client thought so. It just wasn't most important. But the competitor had a chance of taking the business away because they actually excelled. They overachieved the customer's expectations on speed. So bottom line, it's important to understand how your differentiators compare to your customers' priorities. And there's a really simple way to do this. And in this case, we did one-on-ones, and your salespeople, and likely you, are talking to your most important customers all the time to simply find out, what's most important to them. Really important to do right now because a lot have changed. Perhaps what customers value in terms of differentiators that you bring to the table have changed as well.
Hey,
But
Deborah,
yes,
can I interject for a second?
please, please.
Yeah, so as you know, because we've looked at this slide in a different context, I really love this slide, right? But to tie this slide and the prior slide together, I mean, just one thing to think about is we're all aware of the sort of the global viewpoint or the national viewpoint, right? And when we look at that chart that you showed and the two different perspectives, from one year to the next, the details matter a lot because not every sector and every type of business experienced the same sort of recovery or the same sort of recession, right? So as we may have people on this on this discussion that could possibly have had their very best year ever in 2020, sort of against all odds, right? There are certain businesses that prospered in very difficult circumstances. There are other businesses that, particularly, I mean, the kind of the headlines are around, the hospitality sector or travel or tourism or, what have you. There are other businesses that really struggled, and their decline was probably substantially deeper than that curve and may still be going on. And what I like about this slide is it really calls to you to look very, very carefully at what it is that you think is important about your business, but to look at it through your client's eyes, because their perspective may actually be very different than yours. And so there, that's kind of, for me on this one, is one takeaway. And the other one is, you don't really understand, if you don't understand what your competitors do and how they stack up against your clients' requirements, you're going to struggle, right? And so this whole idea of figuring out, it's like the drinking your Kool-Aid example, right? It's not like what you think is important that matters, is what the client thinks is important, right? And in this particular example is a really good one. So whether you're in the sectors that grew dramatically and you're now trying to figure out, hey, how do I repeat that in 2022? Or you're in the sectors that didn't grow very well and you're really struggling to figure out how to come out of this idea of figuring out what your customer really cares about is superbly important. So thanks for the opportunity to jump in.
Yeah,
It may
no.
also be that the world pivoted right into your competitor's sweet spot. Maybe they had a feature that was not very competitive 2 years ago and suddenly got to be very competitive.
Yeah, really good point. And I love also that you brought in that not every company is experiencing this growth. It could be for other reasons than a differentiator or a value proposition. It could be because a part that's critical for the product is simply unavailable due to supply constraints. I was talking to a founder of a company the other day who makes bicycles custom made to children. And one of the most important components he learned that he gets from out of the country is has a 600-day delay. Well, that's a problem. And so his most important mission is to find short run, production and get those bikes in the hands of customers so he doesn't lose. So what should have been his best year this year is a crisis year where he's solving, other problems as well. So everyone is experiencing this differently, even though we look at the trends and we see there's opportunity. But the key is to be close to the customer and understand what does it take and be sure that you have the most important differentiator for them. And also, what does it take to get product into their hands in a way that they value. Going on to the next slide, there are also some other things that are not necessarily changes that just occurred because of the pandemic. Digital has just been growing. I mean, it's definitely not a new thing, but this is actually information largely from Forrester, I might add, where what we're seeing is that B2B buyers, we know in our own lives as B2C shoppers, we all, go online, but B2B buyers start with online research as well. And 92% of them do. And by the time they actually talk to a salesperson in your company, they may be 60% or more through their decision-making process. And they've also, part of that decision-making process is researching online. Part of that research also includes social networks. Glassdoor, for example, they may want to find out what employees think about how this company is run, or various social media and reviews about clients. So it's all transparent. And in fact, by the time they do get to that salesperson, they likely know as much or more about your company and the competition and what your customers think than even many of your salespeople know. So it's important to then think about, what are the actual implications of this? If digital is playing such an outsized role in influencing decision, what is it actually that B2B buyers are doing in doing this research? And I think on the next slide, Mark, if you want to go ahead, and anyone jump in if you have a comment or a question here. Let's think about a buyer's research process. Now, this chart is not very neat because the process is messy. And whether it's a more complex buy, perhaps this is a more complex buy, or even if it's a less complex product or service, there's still a lot of activity around 4 core steps. Identify, if you're the customer making the purchase of a product or service, you've got to first identify a problem. The problem comes to light. What are the possible solutions? What are the requirements if we're going to make a purchase here to solve the problem for us? And then, the selection process of the supplier. But you can see there are many activities along the way, and it may go forward and then reverse, go up, go down. And where is the research? What has been the role of digital as a key tool in the buyer's research process? And for example, there may be independent online research about the problem. And the first step is not typing in your URL. It may be just a generic category of a problem that they have. Here's an opportunity to either show up or not show up as the customer goes through that research process. They may now start to look at white papers and other content to support their understanding of this problem and ways that other companies or organizations solve it. And of course, they'll talk to colleagues. They may talk to other peers in other companies in their industries or other industries. But there's a lot of activity going on, and a lot of it is on the web searches, downloads, hopefully filling out forms to request more information, maybe looking for a virtual demo, and then getting into user supplier demos, and then starting to narrow it down to who do we really want to talk to, and then conducting those either in person or Zoom interviews, and then the decision-making process. So it's a complex process when you break it down into these different pieces, but it happens in companies making any kind of a material purchase, and it's not neat, it's messy, but you can clearly see how digital, if we think about it from the consumers or the customers' buying process, is messy. And digital plays a huge role along the way. And was there a question or
I wanted Yeah, Deborah, I just wanted to jump in real quick. You know, I've looking at this, so it took me a little while to figure this out, right? But in looking at this slide, something that dawned on me in just kind of staring at this for a while is the more complicated the solution is, the more likely it is that there are multiple stakeholders in making that decision.
Very true.
Right? I mean, that intuitively makes sense. But the thing that I didn't think all the way through was that we talk about the buyer, and the reality of it is the buyer isn't one person. The buyer is every one of those stakeholders doing their own independent research to try to figure out how whatever it is, and think of a complicated software solution, right? Whatever it is that they're trying to acquire, how that product or service actually meets, first of all, meets the company requirements, but very specifically meets their requirements, their departmental needs, the things that are key to them, right? And so remember, you and I were talking about what does this mean for the sales team? And what it means for the sales team is, you know, at whatever point in this process, somebody in this organization gets connected with a salesperson who represents a product or a service, that salesperson needs to understand, you know, not only their own value proposition, but also their competitor's value proposition. And even more importantly, how that comparison operates at the individual stakeholder level. So the chief technology officer stakeholder level, the CFO stakeholder level, the chief human capital officer stakeholder level, the user level, all of those things. And so that one slide that you had earlier that talked about oftentimes, you know, customers 60% through their decision before a salesperson gets involved at all. Well, when that salesperson finally does get involved, he or she is dealing with a very educated and very savvy and very knowledgeable customer, and they better have their act together, because they may not get more than one shot to actually advance the sale. And this whole idea that there's lots of people involved for a complicated offering, I mean, it really resonated with me this time around looking at this slide.
Very good. Very good. Let's go on to the next slide, and unless there are any other comments here, because the point that Chris made very much relates to this, and that is that the role of sales and marketing have shifted. Before digital became so prominent with B2B buyers, you know, marketing is, and even today in many businesses, marketing is thought of as this top of funnel routine, when in fact now marketing's role is to support sales by making sure that along that buyer's journey, which we saw on the prior slide, that marketing is working to bring in content, the right content at the right time, to really support that buyer's research and process, buying process, and to make sure that that they can deliver qualified leads to the sales team. And while it looks on the right-hand side as if sales team role has shrunk, it by no means has, because like Chris was just saying, by the time that lead gets to a salesperson, they have so much information. The sales job, and Chris, you'll affirm or deny this, but the sales job seems that it's so much more complicated with so many players, as Chris said, who now have so much information and so much perspective on your business. So the role of marketing is to make sure that in places that make the most sense, that content and information about your company's value proposition and offering is present along the digital channels. And of course, other tools are important, whether conferences, trade shows, and other kinds of tools. But this is to really emphasize how that buyer's journey has changed the role of digital, and how that's changed the marketing sales roles and made it more important than ever that marketing and sales are collaborating. These are not independent, unrelated functional silos, at least not at their best. That marketing needs to be gaining feedback from sales and making sure that that's being pulled back into the journey, into content, information, and flow. Let's go on to the next slide.
Yeah, well, I would just make a comment to the extent that the sales process is more complex, the decision criteria are more complex. Your brand as a provider of services or products should reflect the fact that you are capable of juggling many aspects of this decision, that you can talk to the CTO, the CFO, the CEO, et cetera, and you understand you're not just providing a service, because they're not looking for just, people are looking for solutions, not just a product or a thing that they have to solve.
It calls out the team sport sort of aspect of this too. I mean, not to pull yet another analogy in, but when you think about, so let's say a given government contractor, as an example, has a business development team, and that business development team has a set of responsibilities. Oftentimes embedded in the client is some sort of a project team. They're already doing work. They're the closest to the client that anybody in that company is going to be on a day-to-day basis. And so you have to drive a process inside your organization that enables the people that interact with the client to share what it is they're learning about what it is the client actually cares about. And that information certainly, if we're trying to influence an RFP in a particular direction, or we're trying to win one that we think should be within our wheelhouse to win, or if we're even just building awareness in a community about what it is we actually do well, all of the information that the client has needs to get unlocked by the project team, the business development resources, the technical support people, and then fed back to the marketing organization, whether it's product marketing or whether it's product management, or whether it's marketing communications, or whether it's a branding strategy. You have to enable the resources that are closest to the customer to have a chance to talk about what the customer says is important. And that needs to find its way back to marketing, because this slide that we have up, I mean, you could break top of funnel, middle of funnel, and bottom of the funnel. There's a role for the marketing team in each of those areas, and there's, frankly, I think there's a role for the sales team in each of those areas too, right? Mm-hmm. So the closer that we can get this team linked around common goals, objectives, around common growth opportunities, I think you'll end up with a much stronger positioning in the marketplace as a result.
Absolutely agree. And if you think about the prior chart, what have we tried to establish here? That your differentiators matter, and we need to make sure our differentiators are the one that matters most to customers. And then how do you find that information out so that you can provide the information that will be most helpful to your buyers in their buyer journey? You can do research, you can do one-on-ones and all this stuff, but you can also be closely linked as a marketer with the sales team. That's a key point that Chris was making. And these are some real practical points. Know if your differentiators are what matters most. And secondly, make sure that sales and marketing are like one team, passing information back and forth, so that both can understand what is the market conversation, and that marketing can make sure that they are feeding that need and desire of the buyer to have that information, and then pull them into your website, because you are providing the information that they need, and then get them with your salesperson, who becomes their advisor in continuing that buying journey.
Right. So Chevy's expertise is really about conversion. And so conversion is not a yes, no buying decision. It's lots of different people are now involved, and you got some maybes and no's that have to be converted internally, and not nows, and I need more information. So Chevy, do you have any thoughts about how to sort of enhance that conversion process when there's a complex buying system underway, which you can't really see inside of? Mute.
You're on mute.
Chevy, you're on mute.
Someone gave me a mug not long ago that you
Can you guys hear me now?
You're on mute. I don't have it with me, but but if I had it, I would have it up to Shevy. So
Yeah,
he can-
no, I was just saying that, you know, my best thoughts are always on mute. No, I was just saying, Mark, that I agree with everything that you're saying, and that there are several things that stood out to me, at least like 3 different things as it relates. Can you go down a couple slides? There was a slide that we were recently on before. Here we go. Let me hit on 3 quick things. Number one, it's interesting that I'm sitting here with someone that I would refer to as a peer and someone I look up to as Deborah, as a CMO strategist. And of course, she looks at things, and it makes sense where she's at in the context of this conversation. And what we're talking about is our, client, our audience and our avatar. What do they look like? What do they want? And I see Chris riding Deborah's coattails, as any chief sales officer would, because obviously what he wants is to basically feed the clientele, the patient, the audience, whoever that end engagement is. He wants to feed them what they want to, hear, so that and that's the reality, right? I'm going to approach this from a business standpoint. We have, I can see the attendee list. The people within the attendees are CEOs, senior vice presidents, founders, multiple CEOs. So, we're big boys and big girls here, and we can handle these conversations. Ultimately, the reason why we want to tell people what they want to hear is because we want to sell to them, right? So the number one thing that I'm hearing here is, figure out what it is that your clients want to buy, and then package it and sell it to them. It really simple concept. There was actually a slide here that kind of represented that in terms of what we think they care about design versus what they care about speed. The second thing is, and this is just as important, if not as important as, they say an idea is only as good as its execution. So what we mean by that is, obviously Chris is a CSO and Deborah is a CMO, are really great strategists in helping you identify the issue. But once you've identified the issue, using marketing in its purest form, which is communication, is how do you then, visualize that to your end audience. So visualization is the second thing I wanted to mention really quick. Visualize those things, visualize those pain points, get people to have an easy time understanding what it is that you have the problems that you can solve for them. And the reason I came back to this slide, which was my third point, awareness. We're all part of AG, Association for Enterprise Growth, and the reason we're part of this organization is because it's kind of like a peer group, a mentorship group, an advisory group, CEOs, business professionals, owners, subject matter experts, and you can surround yourself with all these people as much as possible. But if you don't have the awareness, which is the top thing at the top of this funnel, it ain't going to help you much. I learn something new every single day. I've had years in my business where I've banged my head against the wall, just wishing and praying and hoping that I knew what to do, versus years where I have so much feedback and so much information, I have no idea where to start, and I'm overwhelmed because I want to do everything at once. Just on this panel alone, between Deborah, Chris, and myself, I can guarantee you we could identify 3 unique, errors within any organization, because every organization has room to improve. And then the question really becomes, as a CEO, as a VP, as a president of your organization, are you willing to, step out there and ask yourself, what do I not know? And I think that's such an easy thing to do. The hard part is admitting that there's something you might not know. But once you've gotten past that, because there's a lot of things we all don't know, once you've gotten past that and you then reach out to individuals like Deborah and Chris, who are subject matter experts, and say, hey, can you just come in and powwow with me? I think that just about every business professional that's out there, if it's the right organization and the right fit, they're willing to invest some of their own time and energy and at least on the surface scratch, what it is that you might be missing. And then you can take that information as a leader within your own right and decide what it is that you want to invest your time and energy in. Anyways, I'll stop there. I could keep rambling on day and day on, but that's why I choose not to talk as often as I want to.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Chevy.
Thank you. Thank you. So Chevy kind of talked a little bit about pain points. And we've used the term value proposition a couple of times, and it is jargon, and we all know what it means, but I kind of want to break it down to relate it to what we've been talking about, and that is how you uniquely solve your customers' pain points and why they should choose you over other options. And this refers back to the differentiators and understanding the customer pain points in the first place, staying close to customers. But I also want to highlight that value proposition has everything to do with the things that are boxed in the orange box over there. It's what is your product and service? How are you pricing it? What sales channels do you operate through? How can customers buy? Who are you actually targeting? And what is how do you message them throughout the channels? And having a compelling value proposition means that you can uniquely solve your customers' pain points and do it in a way that only you can do. I call a compelling brand value proposition the anti-commodity. Glenn, I think earlier in the chat, you said it's interesting in a prior chart that price wasn't even mentioned, and certainly it is a factor, but it's the whole package together. And if you don't have differentiators, then often it does, defer to price. I don't know if others have a comment on this, but to me, this kind of sums up what is a value prop and the kinds of things that we need to stay on top of and make sure that we're offering the best. Let's go on to the next slide. For Chris, because it really comes down to Chris.
So let me just give you a little context here. And this slide is really there to kind of set up the next one, which is around, what do you do about all this stuff? But I told you at the beginning that I was part of a group called Sales Acceleration. We are 160 roughly, right, outsourced sales leaders, in the US. Each of us are independent businesses, and we found our way to Sales Acceleration through a variety of different means, but we all pretty much do the same type of work for the same type of clients. And one of the things, there's a lot of individualization in all of this, and I do certain things that other people don't, and I have certain subject areas that I'm probably stronger at. They have others. The point here, though, is that what Sales Acceleration has is a volume view of the world. So we have this thing called a sales agility assessment that we offer for clients and potential clients to go through. And so we've done 2,300 plus of these, starting basically in 2018. So this data was about mid 2020. So basically what it says is the top, there's 73%, that number is not on here, but 73% of CEOs and business owners thought that their company did a poor to less than poor job of managing their sales processes. And so when you start to dig into that a little bit, the top areas are competitive analysis, marketing spend, sales cycle, and value proposition, and prospects, scoring their prospects. And so what this sort of thing typically causes us to do as we work with clients is to dig in to their particular business to try to really figure out what's working well and what's not working well. Based on the answer to that, we'll then build a path out of that should lead to predictable revenue growth. The next slide, though, is where we really wanted to go, which was, whether you are in the sector that did great, you're now trying to figure out how to double things in 2022, or you're in the sector that didn't do very well and you're trying to think through, how do I get out of this? Or you're somewhere in the middle. there's almost no better time than late summer as we start to make the turn into Labor Day and then the fourth quarter of the year to really drill into what I call sales due diligence, right? And much like if you were positioning your company to be sold, or you were you were working with another company to try to decide if you were going to acquire them, you want to understand whether your revenue generation cycle is capable of delivering what you need to deliver at the rate that meets your expectations. So there's just a lot of open-ended questions here. There's a couple of closed-ended ones, but a lot of open-ended questions. I'm curious to know, right? And if I'm a business owner, I want to know whether my strategy is actually working, right? It might be working, but not be working well enough. It might not be working at all. Some parts of it might be working and others might not be working. So a very simple look at, hey, what strategy did we have to grow? I'd recommend we take a look at that, right? I'd recommend you very specifically look at your sales engine. What happens from the time a lead gets there to what actually gets done with that lead, right? And try to figure out, where the holes are in that. And then obviously what to do about those. The target market piece is really important. And if you're not precise, Shevy mentioned avatars, Deborah talked about, value proposition and buyer's journey. If you're not precise about who it is that you're selling to and why it is that they should buy from you, this is the time to go figure that out. And most importantly, from the sales side, you got to make sure your sales and business development people understand those principles really well, right? Sometimes I see this all the time, this bullet around whether your sales team has targets and that they're prioritized. A lot of sales teams, for lack of planning, I think more than anything else, are kind of out there running at the market as fast as they can in kind of a haphazard fashion, right? If you're a sales leader or a business owner, what you want your sales team working on is you want your sales team working on opportunities that have a high likelihood of actually closing, right? So figuring out who to sell to and how to stack rank them in terms of most likely to least likely, and then how to engage. That's terrifically important. We talked about your value proposition. Ask yourself if it's still appropriate, right? In the sales cycle itself, you got to understand what has to happen to advance the sale at every step in the sales cycle, right? I think of these as like hurdle questions. If you're trying to ascertain whether a client or a prospect is actually qualified or not, well, you should have a set of methodology. You should have a methodology to determine what makes them qualified and what makes them not qualified. And sometimes, salespeople are hopeful and optimistic by nature, right? We like to think everything's going to close, but it doesn't, right? So,
Chris, if
yeah.
can I just interject?
Absolutely.
We talked earlier about the importance of collaboration between sales and marketing, and the key point that Chris is making. Marketing needs to absolutely understand also who is that target by title, by size of company, by 3 or 4 things that Chris or might share, so that when they're marketing, that's who they're delivering, versus bringing all these quote unquote leads to the sales team that are not qualified in the first place. So that collaboration, this chart makes a really big point about the importance of that collaboration in the practical delivery of leads to salesperson.
Let's maybe just look quickly at the last slide the next slide we have on questions, because there's a whole bunch more questions you could ask. This whole idea of sales and marketing integration is really important. We've talked about that since the beginning of this session. I'm sure we'll talk more about it. What we didn't really talk about is what metrics and analytics you use to tell whether you're making any progress or not. I've seen Deborah's work on both qualitative and quantitative metrics to determine whether marketing programs are actually succeeding. And I think that sort of approach is huge. Before you throw the next, $200,000 at the marketing program, there are ways to measure what's working well and what's not working well. And there are effectiveness metrics for sales that do the same thing, right? Things like, how effective are we at, what percentage of proposals actually close, or what's the lead conversion ratio really like, or what percentage of clients are actually qualified. right? That forces the sales and the marketing team to come together because the leads came in from somewhere. And then we found out somewhere along the way that maybe they weren't qualified for whatever reason. Well, marketing needs to know why that is, because we're not going to go try to repeat the same kind of results. This whole idea of getting your competitors figured out, I'd go top 3 by line of business and channel, and I think that's plenty for anybody to say grace over on a given day. That's a lot, right? And then leadership is we haven't really talked much about the people, but I see that because Bill Huter is still on here. Yeah. So, I mean, I know that Bill goes through this process of trying to, determine that, we have the right people in the right seats all the time. Sometimes you don't, and you have to figure out if you have the right person, but maybe they're not in the right seat, or maybe you didn't define the seat properly. This whole idea of digging into the people and that's going to make the difference pretty much in anything else that you do, but you got to make sure that you have the right team in place. The right sales leader, the right marketing leader, the right collaborators, the right individual contributors, all of that. So I just recommend, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock here, I just recommend that if you haven't already done this, I mean, we should retitle this sales and marketing due diligence, but go take the time to dig into this stuff with your senior team and make sure you can convince yourself that the answers for each of these are actually positive. Mark, back to you.
Right. Yeah. So do we have any questions that came in the Q&A?
I do not see any open questions.
Okay.
All
I want
right.
to be respectful of people's time. So we said we'd end at 12:55. So I'd like to do that. So feel free to reach out to any of the individuals here. Deborah, Chris, Chevy, or myself. Be happy to answer your questions and have an exploration of some of the issues you have. Most of the questions you have will show up on a drive tomorrow or in the shower 2 days from now. They're really not the kind of things that show up immediately. But think about these things. Yeah, we'll reach out to you, send these information to you about how to get in touch with individuals. If something piqued your interest, or you found something that's interesting.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Just to add a little golden nugget for those 9 participants that are hanging on at the very end. I have a simple question for you. Do you know what your client acquisition cost is? For some of you, you might be thinking, absolutely, I know that. And others are like, what's that? I have no idea. And if you don't know what that is, or if you think you only have one, there are multiple client acquisition costs depending on the type of client, whether it's a per project client, an annual client, a lifetime client, the different products or services that you have that you sell. You can gather all the data in the world, but you won't be able to compare it to something if you don't understand what it is that you need to compare it to. These are all really cool things to understand. So if you don't know what your client acquisition cost is, that's something that you should go and look into. And if you do, then that's where, your baseline is.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark, I just wanted to throw that in there based on what Chris was sharing earlier.
Thanks. So just like a good close in sales, we're going to do a good close on this seminar. Thank you all for participating. Like I said, we'll send you information and you can reach out to these people. These really are our top 3 elite of the elite, the best of the best we have in sales and marketing. So we're proud to have them as part of AEG. And thank you very much for participating. Take care.
I'll take
Bye.
care. I'll let Deborah and
Yeah,
Chris
everyone.
Bye.